Shalom Aleichem. I thought I would make a second video following up to the video I made last time and talking about a little bit of the founder of the Hasidic movement and who he was, which, before I even start, the man I'm about to describe, the man who founded the Hasidic movement, was godly in every single way. He was so connected to God in every single way, and his whole existence just went into worshiping him and to serving God. It's unbelievable how holy this person was, and how connected he was, and how he appealed to the simple Jews and to the scholars and to everyone. So, the founder of the Chasidic movement was named Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, and he was one of these men you can't describe. He wasn't a normal person in any sense of the term. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. This might take a little while because I have to explain the context of why the Hasidic movement rose up in the first place, so I'm sorry if I take a little more of your time than I did in the last video. So, during the 1600s, there were uprisings in southern Ukraine. What happened was the Poles suppressed the Ukrainians and imposed heavy taxes on the Ukrainians. Now, Jews were invited to Poland over 3 centuries before these rebellions happened, because Poland wanted to kickstart its economy, and Jews were historically known for being good businessmen. And after we were kicked out of Germany, the Poles invited us, and we gladly accepted the offer because we had nowhere else to go. So the Jews moved into Poland, and what happened was that the Poles decided they would use us as tax collectors for the Ukrainians, and we would go and we would impose the taxes for the Poles. And the Poles would impose heavy taxes, and we were just the collectors, the Jews. So the Jews would go and collect the taxes. Now, after this, a lot of Ukrainians got upset by this. And there was a certain man, his name was Bohdan Khmelnytsky. He's actually a national hero in Ukraine to this day. And he decided to rebel against the Poles and their oppression of the Ukrainian people, as they thought, and the Ukrainians were more sympathetic towards Russia, and they were interested to join the Russian Empire. Now, the Poles were all the way in Poland, while the Ukrainian rebels did end up killing some Polish lords. The majority of them were in Poland, and there was a large Jewish community in Ukraine. So you had two options. You could go to Poland and kill the Poles over there, and the Poles and the Ukrainians had religious differences, or you could kill the Jews right here in Ukraine, and they collected the taxes from them anyways. So estimates are not clear, but they say estimates range from 25,000 to 250,000 Jews killed in Ukraine during that time. I'd say the more accurate number of Jews killed is closer to 50,000 Jews killed in Ukraine, not 25,000. That's historically inaccurate. But still, it was a large portion of Eastern European Jewish population. And a lot of Jews were depressed by this. This happened in the 1640s. So, what happened was, there was a lot of hype for Mashiach to come soon. And it is true, as Jews were supposed to believe that Mashiach could come at any given moment. We say in a lot of our prayers that we're hoping for Mashiach, and we say at the end of the standing prayer, so it translates to, may it be your will, Hashem, our God, and the God of our forefathers, that you will rebuild your temple speedily in our days and grant us a portion in your Torah. So that's what it says. And we hope for the Mashiach's coming every day. And what happened was, there was a lot of prophecy going on into when Mashiach was going to come, and a lot of Kabbalists were predicting things. And the set year for Mashiach's coming was either 1665 or 1666. And there was a lot of hype about that. And there was a false Mashiach who stood up in Turkey, and he said, "I'm Mashiach, and I'm going to bring the Jews back to Israel." And he gained a large, as shameful as this is, that this man would rise up and proclaim himself Mashiach. He rose up, and he had about 30% of the worldwide Jewish population following him, while the other 70% rallied against him. But it was still a very large following, and big scholars such as the Taz, who was, if you don't know what the Taz was, he wrote a commentary on the Code of Jewish Law, were investigating to see if he was Mashiach or not. The Taz eventually said he wasn't Mashiach due to something he did. However, he came to a climax, his false messiahship, when this guy who was the false Mashiach, he was from Turkey, his name was Shabtai Tzvi, and he came to the Ottoman emperor in Turkey, and he said, "I need you to release Israel from the Ottoman rule, and they need to institute the Messianic era and rebuild the temple." And the Ottoman Sultan gave him a choice. The Ottoman Sultan said, "Well, that's very cute and everything. So you want to go and build a temple in Jerusalem? I'll give you a counteroffer. Convert to Islam or I cut off your head." Because he was contesting, the Ottomans were not usually so violent towards the Jews. However, he was demanding a portion of Ottoman territory. So he gave him an option. Convert to Islam or I cut off your head. And Shabtai Tzvi and his main students, his close students, not the majority of his students, but his close students ended up converting to Islam. And those other Jews, and the vast majority of Jews who were his followers, ended up feeling dejected and going back home very depressed because they thought they were on the verge of Mashiach coming after this terrible calamity that happened in Ukraine. And after Shabtai Tzvi, there ended up being a very big divide, because the rabbis were afraid that another Shabtai Tzvi was going to show up. So in a counter-reaction to this, they made Judaism very, not strict, but rigorous. They made Judaism very rigorous, and they made it in a way where it was very hard to be a simple Jew. And during these times, learning went down a lot, and the vast majority of Eastern European Jews barely knew how to read the prayer book in Hebrew. The vast majority of them didn't know how to read. It says, there was some estimates I heard from Dr. Henry Abramson that he said Jews usually had a higher literacy rate than non-Jews in that part of the world, and the literacy rate among Jews in that part of the world was 60%, but it was in one language. So that one language could have been Russian or Yiddish or Hebrew, and it was only the vast majority of Jews did not know how to read a prayer book. They barely knew how to read. And due to the fact that the vast majority of Jews became uneducated, these group of scholars became elite. They were the elite. And there was a very big separation, and the vast majority of Jews didn't know the basic laws. They barely knew how to keep kosher. They barely knew how to keep Shabbos, and they were very, very, very uneducated, well-meaning but uneducated Jews, and they didn't have a proper education. So the Baal Shem Tov grew up in this world, and what the Baal Shem Tov did, the Baal Shem Tov was an incredible scholar. I'm not going to tell you the stories about him, because even I find these stories absolutely fascinating. I believe them, but they're a little hard to believe because of absolutely how fascinating they are. So I'm just going to skip that and go into what he did. Now, what he did was he started putting out mysticism, Jewish mysticism, in a way that the peasants would understand. He started telling stories. He started telling this and that, and he wrote. Some of his teachings are recorded by his students, this was not his primary mode of teaching mysticism. He taught mysticism to his students in more thought out ways, but to the simple Jews he told stories and told them why we serve God and with the benefits of serving God and how you should serve God. And he didn't give them long discourses in mysticism. He told them usually in the parable of stories or explained to them on a very simple level so they could understand. And this revolutionized the Jewish world. And a lot of these elite scholars had a problem with him, not because he was educating the Jews, the simple Jews, but because they thought he might be another Shabbatai Tzvi because of some of the things he was preaching. Because complex Talmudic sessions, because the Talmud is a very complicated book, and complex Talmudic sessions were usually favored over studying, let's say, basic Tehillim or basic Torah. It was encouraged to study basic Torah, but these elite scholars and the rabbis usually said you should devote most of your time to complex Talmudic discourses. So what happened was, this was very controversial that he was preaching this at this time to just learn simple Psalms or simple Torah or simple Tanakh. Tanakh is what is usually called the Old Testament, and this was very controversial at the time. And the rabbis opposed him because he thought it was going to be another Shabbatai Tzvi. But the movement carried on, and there were a lot of rabbis who didn't know, who were misinformed about the Hasidic movement, or who were not really, or who had darker, more ulterior motives behind opposing the Hasidic movement, which we won't get into now. But the misinformed ones, a lot of them, like the majority of the Baal Shem Tov's close students, the Baal Shem Tov had a following of of peasants who were uneducated, and he had his close disciples who numbered about 300 students, and they were the scholars, and they were the ones he taught more complex mysticism to. And this was the beginning of the Hasidic movement, and by the time the Baal Shem Tov died, he had about 10,000 followers. He had about 10,000 followers, learned and non-learned, mostly not learned, and the Hasidic movement would only continue to grow from there. I'm going to continue elaborating in the next few weeks about exactly what the Baal Shem Tov did and tell you some stories from his life. I'm also going to post some shiurim by Moshe Weinberger here. It's just going to be the audio with some changing pictures of a few Hasidic paintings, so it doesn't get too long, but these shiurim by this rabbi are extremely good, but they're about an hour long, so listen to them in the car if you can. Just listen to these shiurim that I will upload, and I hope to see you soon, and I hope you learn from this, and we can all become better Jews and bring Mashiach quicker. Amen v'amen.